Behind the tall concrete walls of a prison, the outside world believes inmates are cut off from violence, weapons, and danger. To many, prison is supposed to be the safest place for society's criminals, a space where control is in the hands of the guards, where strict surveillance keeps everyone in check. But what happens when a crime more horrifying than the outside world occurs behind those same bars? This story begins with a woman who thought her worst nightmare was already behind her, the sentence that put her in prison. For her, each day was about survival. She followed the rules, avoided conflict, and tried to serve her time in silence. Yet on one ordinary day, her life was shattered in a way she could never have imagined. It started with the silence of the morning. The prison yard was crowded, inmates walking in circles, some exercising, some sitting quietly, while guards kept a half-hearted watch. The woman was among them, blending in with the routine of prison life. She had no reason to believe this day would be different. But as the minutes ticked by, something sinister was already unfolding around her. Suddenly, in the middle of chatter and footsteps, there was a scream, one that cut through the heavy air of the prison yard. It was hers. The scream was so piercing that it silenced everyone instantly. Within seconds, panic spread. She fell to the ground, clutching her face, her voice trembling with agony. That's when everyone realized she had been burned with acid. The liquid dripped from her skin, burning, scarring, eating away at her face and arms. The stench of chemicals filled the yard. Other inmates backed away in shock, some gasping, others frozen in fear. Guards rushed in, but even they hesitated, stunned by what they were seeing. Acid inside a prison? It was unthinkable. The chaos grew louder. Some prisoners whispered, others shouted, demanding answers. How could such a dangerous substance even find its way into one of the most secure places in the country? Who brought it in? Who dared to use it? And most importantly, why her? As she writhed in pain, guards scrambled to call medical staff. But the prison infirmary was never prepared for something like this. Acid attacks are brutal, leaving lifelong scars, both physical and emotional. The woman was rushed inside, her body shaking, her voice fading. Her screams still echoed in the minds of those who watched. And yet, in that moment, one truth became clear. This was not a random act of violence. This was personal. Someone inside that prison had gone to great lengths to get acid, to plan this attack, and to make sure it left a permanent mark, not just on her body, but on her soul. But who was it? Speculation spread like wildfire. Some whispered that another inmate was jealous, holding grudges that boiled into hatred. Others suspected corruption, a guard smuggling in the deadly chemical for a price. And there were even darker theories. Maybe the attack was ordered from outside the prison walls, by someone who wanted her silenced forever. In the days that followed, this single moment became more than an attack. It became a symbol of everything wrong with the system. Prisons were supposed to rehabilitate, to keep people safe from each other. Instead, this incident proved that inside those walls, cruelty thrived, and rules meant nothing when power, revenge, and money entered the game. The woman's life would never be the same again. Her face bore the scars of the attack, but her story carried scars that went much deeper. The question burned in everyone's mind: who wanted to destroy her so badly that they would use acid, a weapon meant to scar forever? And as whispers turned into rumors, and rumors turned into investigations, one thing was clear: this was not just an attack. This was a message. Before the acid burned her skin and shattered her life, this woman was just another inmate trying to survive her sentence. To understand why someone would want to destroy her so brutally, we need to look at who she was, where she came from, and what her life looked like behind those prison walls. Her name isn't as important as her story. She wasn't famous, she wasn't rich, and she wasn't powerful. She was an ordinary woman whose life had taken a turn for the worse. Outside the prison, she had once been someone's daughter, someone's friend, maybe even someone's mother. But circumstances, whether mistakes she made herself or the harsh reality of her world, landed her behind bars. When she first entered prison, she quickly learned that survival wasn't about physical strength. It was about mental toughness. Behind those walls, everything changed. The food was barely edible, privacy was non-existent, and trust was a dangerous gamble. She kept her head low, followed the rules, and avoided conflict whenever she could. Unlike some inmates who formed gangs or alliances, she mostly stayed by herself. But prison is not a place where you can completely disappear. Rivalries form quickly, and jealousy grows in the smallest of spaces. Even a glance, a whispered comment, or a rumor can turn into a grudge. And sometimes, the smallest sparks ignite the biggest flames. For her, life inside was difficult. But she wasn't one of the troublemakers. She wasn't violent, nor did she pick fights. Instead, she often kept to the corner of the yard, observing, listening, and trying to adapt. To some, this made her appear weak. To others, it made her look suspicious. And in prison, perception is often more dangerous than reality. Her crime? It wasn't one of the most notorious. She wasn't a serial killer, nor a drug lord. Her offense was relatively minor compared to many others around her. Some said it was theft, others whispered fraud. Whatever it was, it didn't deserve the brutal punishment that awaited her. But in a system full of hardened criminals, even those with smaller charges often became targets. Over time, she developed a routine. Wake up early, join the line for breakfast, endure the constant noise of the prison halls, and try to find peace in small things. A book from the library, a moment of silence in the cell, or the rare kindness of another inmate. Yet even in these rare moments, the threat of violence was always lurking. Other inmates noticed her. Some were curious about her quiet nature. Some mocked her for being soft, and a few took it even further. Whispers of jealousy, envy, and dislike began to follow her. Why? No one knew for sure. In prison, sometimes the reason doesn't matter. Hatred doesn't always need logic, it only needs opportunity. Still, she had no reason to believe she was in danger. She had managed to avoid major conflicts, never clashed with the gangs inside, and never openly challenged the authority of the guards. She thought that if she stayed invisible, trouble would never find her. But invisibility in prison is a myth. Behind the bars, grudges often build silently. Someone might envy the way you carry yourself, the way others treat you, or simply the peace you try to hold on to. Sometimes it isn't about what you did. It's about what you represent. For this woman, her existence was enough to spark hostility in the wrong hearts. Outside the walls, her family had all but abandoned her. Prisoners often rely on visitors to keep them connected to the outside world, but her visits were rare, if they came at all. The loneliness of abandonment weighed heavily on her. Yet, she carried herself with quiet strength, refusing to break down where others could see. And maybe that strength, her refusal to crumble, was exactly what made her a target. In a place where weakness is preyed upon, strength can also breed resentment. So before that terrible day, before the acid scarred her forever, she was simply a woman trying to endure her sentence in silence. She didn't know that someone was watching her closely, waiting for the right moment to strike. She didn't know that her attempts to survive quietly had painted her as a target in someone's eyes. Her life before the attack wasn't easy, but compared to what came after, it almost looked peaceful, because the real nightmare had not yet begun. The attack was over in seconds, but the questions it raised would haunt the prison for months. Acid inside a correctional facility was not just unusual, it was unthinkable. How could such a dangerous substance, heavily restricted even in the outside world, find its way into the supposedly secure walls of a prison? For the inmates who witnessed it, the scene replayed in their minds like a nightmare. The screams, the burning, the chemical smell that clung to the air, it all pointed to something carefully planned. This was not an impulsive fight. This was deliberate. Someone wanted to ruin her life forever. But who? The first suspects were obvious. Other inmates. In every prison, grudges and rivalries form like storm clouds. Some believed it was a fight over respect. Others whispered it was about jealousy. Maybe she had unknowingly offended the wrong person. Maybe her attempts to keep to herself were mistaken for arrogance. In a place where small misunderstandings could spark brutal violence, anything was possible. Still, acid wasn't a weapon you just stumbled upon. Unlike a shank made from scrap metal or a fight that ended with fists, this attack required planning, patience, and access. The question wasn't just who threw it, it was who supplied it. That led the whispers to a darker place, the guards. It's no secret that corruption runs deep in many prisons. For the right price, guards have been known to smuggle in cigarettes, drugs, even phones. But acid, that was different. That was deadly. Would a guard really risk everything to bring such a weapon inside? Or had someone higher up allowed it to happen? The rumors spread like wildfire. Some said she had enemies on the outside who paid to make sure she never left prison alive, or at least never left with her dignity intact. Others believed a fellow prisoner had arranged it with the help of a guard, paying with money or favors. But there were also more chilling whispers, that this wasn't about money at all. This was about silencing her. But silencing her from what? No one knew for sure, but a few inmates remembered she had once spoken about things she had seen inside. The abuse, the corruption, the guards who exploited their power. Had she known too much? Had she threatened to expose something that the authorities wanted buried? The investigation that followed was shallow at best. The prison administration wanted one thing: to keep the scandal quiet. Acid attacks grab headlines, and headlines bring scrutiny. For them, it was easier to label it as inmate conflict and move on. The truth was a threat to their reputation, and in prison politics, reputation is everything. Meanwhile, the woman lay in agony, her skin burned, her future destroyed. She kept asking the same question everyone else whispered: who did this to me? But answers were scarce, and fear silenced those who might have known more. In prison, speaking out can be more dangerous than staying quiet. Still, fragments of information began to surface. Some inmates swore they saw another woman holding a small bottle moments before the attack. Others claimed they saw a guard look the other way as it happened. But without proof, these were just stories. Stories that the authorities dismissed as rumors. The mystery only deepened when no one was punished. Days passed, then weeks, and yet the attacker remained hidden. It was as if the acid had appeared out of thin air, struck its target, and then vanished without a trace. This silence spoke volumes. It suggested protection. It suggested cover-up. Someone wanted the truth buried as deep as the scars on her face. And so the mystery remained unsolved. Who threw the acid? A jealous inmate? A corrupt guard? Or someone outside pulling the strings? One thing was certain: the attack was not random. It was personal, precise, and merciless. It wasn't just about causing pain. It was about sending a message that no one in prison was truly safe. And for the woman, that message became her reality. Every time she looked into the cracked mirror of the prison infirmary, she saw not just her scars, but the reminder that her enemy was still out there, watching, waiting, and hidden among the shadows of the prison walls. For the woman, survival after the acid attack was only the beginning. The burns on her skin were excruciating, but the deeper wound was the silence surrounding her case. She wanted justice. She wanted answers. But inside prison walls, justice is often the hardest thing to find. Immediately after the attack, she was rushed to the prison infirmary. The staff did what they could with limited resources, rinsing the burns, wrapping them in makeshift bandages, and giving her painkillers. But anyone could see this wasn't enough. Acid attacks demand urgent, specialized care. The prison wasn't equipped for that. Still, the authorities hesitated to send her to an outside hospital. Why? Because it would raise too many questions. And questions were exactly what the prison administration wanted to avoid. When investigators came, if you could even call them that, their interviews were shallow, their reports vague. Inmate altercation, they wrote. Unidentified object. They deliberately avoided the word acid, as if erasing the name of the weapon could erase the crime itself. But the woman refused to stay silent. Despite her pain, she began demanding to know who had access, who smuggled it in, who threw it on her. Her voice was weak but persistent, and persistence in prison is dangerous. Other inmates noticed her fight. Some admired her courage. Others grew fearful, whispering that she was putting herself at greater risk. Because in prison, asking too many questions is like painting a target on your back. The more she pushed, the more isolated she became. Guards watched her with suspicion, and fellow inmates avoided her, afraid of being dragged into the storm. Her struggle soon reached beyond the prison walls. News of the attack began to leak. Human rights activists picked up the story, and soon, whispers turned into headlines. Acid attack in prison, the newspapers reported. Questions spread to the outside world. How could this happen? How did acid get past security checks? Why was no one being held accountable? The pressure grew, but so did the resistance. Officials denied, delayed, and downplayed. They insisted the prison was safe, that incidents like this were rare, that proper procedures were being followed. But behind closed doors, the truth was uglier. Files were altered, evidence disappeared, and witnesses were intimidated into silence. For the woman, every day was a battle. She fought not just the pain of her injuries, but also the weight of an entire system working against her. She petitioned for medical care, wrote letters to authorities, and tried to speak with journalists whenever she could. Her resilience became both her weapon and her curse. Because the more she fought, the clearer it became. Someone powerful wanted this story buried. Still, her case gained traction. Lawyers began to take interest. Activists demanded independent investigations. For a moment, it seemed as if justice might actually be within reach. But just as quickly, obstacles appeared. Paperwork was lost. Court dates were delayed. Key witnesses were suddenly transferred to other prisons. Every step forward was met with 2 steps back. The woman began to realize that this wasn't just about her. Her case threatened to expose something much larger: corruption, smuggling, and a network of power that connected guards, inmates, and outsiders alike. Her scars were proof of a crime the prison system didn't want the world to see. And so, her fight became symbolic. It was no longer just about her attacker, it was about the truth hidden behind those walls. The more the system tried to silence her, the louder her story became outside. But inside, the danger only grew. She received threats, whispered warnings that if she didn't stop pushing, something worse would happen. The same shadows that planned the acid attack seemed to still be watching her every move. And yet, despite the fear, despite the pain, she kept fighting. Because she knew if she gave up, the message would be clear: that you can commit the cruelest crimes inside prison walls and get away with it. Her fight for justice wasn't just her own. It was for every inmate who had ever been silenced, every victim whose story was erased. She wasn't just battling for answers, she was battling a system built to bury the truth. But as the months dragged on, one question grew heavier than the rest. Would justice ever truly come? Or would her story, like so many others, be buried forever behind prison bars? The investigation dragged on, but the truth never seemed to get any closer. The woman's scars told a story of violence and cruelty, yet the official reports remained vague, filled with phrases like unidentified substance and inmate conflict. To the prison administration, the less said, the better. To her, every silence was another act of injustice. Weeks turned into months. The media interest that once burned bright slowly began to fade. New scandals replaced hers in the headlines, and the outside world's attention moved on. But inside the prison, the mystery still haunted the air. No one had been punished. No one had been named. The acid attack was becoming just another unsolved secret buried behind concrete walls. But there were whispers that never went away. Some inmates quietly claimed they knew who had done it, but they would never dare to speak openly. Fear was stronger than truth. A guard might have supplied the acid. An inmate might have thrown it. Or maybe it was both. A deal made in shadows, sealed with silence. The woman herself kept demanding answers. Even through her pain, she pressed for justice. She asked again and again, "Who did this to me? Why am I the one left scarred while my attacker walks free?" But every time she asked, she was met with the same response: avoidance. Authorities shrugged. Guards glared. Fellow inmates turned away. The silence became unbearable. It was as if everyone had decided that her suffering was more convenient than the truth. Still, outside pressure never disappeared completely. Human rights groups continued to ask questions. Lawyers tried to reopen the case. There were even moments when it seemed like the truth might finally break through, that someone would confess, that evidence would surface, that the guilty would face consequences. But just as quickly, those hopes would collapse. Witnesses transferred, files missing, evidence lost. It was as if the system itself was built not to protect the innocent, but to protect the guilty. And so, the woman was left with only fragments of the truth. She may never know exactly who threw the acid. She may never know how it entered the prison. She may never know whether it was the act of a jealous inmate, a corrupt guard, or a shadowy order from outside. But she did know one thing: someone had wanted her destroyed. Not killed, but scarred. Scarred so deeply that every glance in the mirror would remind her of the attack. Scarred so the world could see her pain, even if they refused to see her truth. That was the cruelest part of it all, the permanence. Prison sentences end. Freedom eventually comes. But acid scars? They are forever. The prison administration moved on, the guards went back to their routines, and the world largely forgot. But she could never forget. Each day, as she walked the halls with her burned face hidden beneath cloth, she carried the weight of unanswered questions. Was justice ever served? The honest answer: no, not in the way she deserved. The attacker remained in the shadows, protected by silence and corruption. The truth remained buried, hidden beneath reports, bureaucracy, and fear. And yet, in another way, her story did break free. The scars made her impossible to ignore. Even if the authorities tried to silence her, her face spoke louder than any words could. She became living proof of the horrors that happen behind bars, proof that no prison is as safe or controlled as officials claim. Her tragedy became a warning, a reminder that in prison, justice is fragile, truth is dangerous, and silence is often the strongest weapon. The final question remains: was the truth exposed, or was it buried? Perhaps both. The full story may never be told, but the scars on her body are the evidence they cannot erase. And long after the investigation closed, long after the headlines faded, one chilling thought lingered in the minds of everyone who heard her story. If acid can find its way into a prison, then what else is possible behind those walls?